Hello, listeners. I'm your host, Jeff Hatter. Thank you for tuning in to Yerba Travels Podcast, the place that delivers all the marvelous wonders of our beautiful world from first-hand accounts of people who live in these exotic places. After listening, head over to yerbatravels.com to find out more cool information. That's yerbatravels.com. And don't forget to subscribe and join the Yerba Travels community. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy today's conversation. All right, my guest today is an American living in Serendip, better known as Sri Lanka, and his name is Craig. Craig, welcome to the show.
Hey, hi, Jeff. Thank you very much. I'm looking forward to my first joust with Yerba Travels. I'm looking forward to it. I hope I can give some information for your bloggers. I don't know what you call video vloggers, but what
Podcast listeners, maybe?
Podcast. There's the word.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry.
Yeah, well, I know there are a lot of people out there that I've talked to already who are looking forward to this because of, Sri Lanka brings up these images. And I know there's a lot of information that we can share right now to kind of, show people a little bit kind of an insight to what Sri Lanka is like, right?
Sure.
So why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about where you're living?
Okay. My name is Craig Gardner. I'm a retired professor of English and drama. I was a professional actor in the United States for about 20 years, where I raised a family. And my father was a military man, an officer in the Army. So as a young boy, I lived in Japan, I lived in Europe. I've literally lived in very many countries, and traveling is part of my life, living abroad, I should say, rather than traveling. And Sri Lanka was kind of an accident. And that word serendipitous, things that happen by accident, was precisely what brought me to Sri Lanka. Unfortunately, during the late 80s and early 90s, the divorce rate in the United States sort of tripled, and I was a member of that. I lived in Washington State, in Seattle, Washington, as a professional actor. I was also a teacher at Cornish College of the Arts. I was a manager at one of the largest law firms in Seattle. I was a full, American, working and doing and everything.
Living the
and
dream.
All of a sudden, a divorce was on my plate. And it literally took me by surprise, as did a lot of people. And I didn't do well with it. All of a sudden, coming from, being a day-to-day dad to becoming a sort of an uncle papa was not the healthiest thing for me in the world. And I started not behaving properly and drinking and drugs, and I couldn't keep my job, and I couldn't teach, and I couldn't get on stage, and everything was starting to fall apart. My grandmother at the time was nearing 100 years of age, and she called me over to her house and said, "I need to talk to you, come here." And she said, "Your problem is you're blaming yourself for all the things that have happened, as opposed to being who you are, which is a kind and giving person. Go and give." And I thought about that night, and I thought, well, gee, what to do? I mean, and the Peace Corps popped into my head. Being a generation of John F. Kennedy, he started it in the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
The community is only about 250,000 people have been Peace Corps volunteers.
Yeah.
So I joined the Peace Corps, and they accepted me. I spoke several languages, and there was no problem. I had the degrees and blah, blah, blah. So they were going to send me to Senegal, and I hadn't thought about that in Northern Africa. I hadn't thought about it at all, and I'm ready to get on the plane. And I get a call. I'm with my folks in Northern California. I get a call. I literally am going to San Francisco to fly for the training that you have before you start being a volunteer. Mm-hmm. And I get a call, and they said, we can't send you to Senegal. You're a vegan. I said, yeah. And they said, you scrape the blood off a cow's leg and mix it with the milk, and that's your food. You can't go there. And I said, no, I can't. That sounds awful. But we have an opening.
All right, I think connection's back. Craig, why don't you continue with that Senegal story?
Yeah, wow. Anyway, to pick up where I left off, I literally was in the airport getting ready to go to Senegal.
Yeah.
And the Peace Corps said, there's no way you can go there as a vegan. And they said, how about Sri Lanka? And I had some knowledge about Sri Lanka through the Theosophist Society. I knew about Arthur, what's his name, Colonel Henry Steele Olcott, one of the founding members of the Theosophist Society, and had some knowledge about Sri Lanka. So I was elated. And the whole reason that I'm bringing this up is because that's what serendip is. It was serendipitous. It was just by accident that I came to Sri Lanka. Literally, I did my training. I think it was a week or 3 days in San Francisco. Hopped on a plane and I landed in Sri Lanka.
Wow.
It was amazing coming here because as a batch, I was in my, what was I, 40, maybe early 40s. And most of the kids, of course, were college graduates. They were 20, 21,
Right.
22. So
Yeah.
I was an instant uncle, and they're all studying, you know, in Kandy, the city we lived in for our training. They're all studying and learning the language and all of this. And being an old traveling guy for years, I just said, well, who cares about that? I'm going to go out on the street and just talk to people.
Right.
So I learned how to say, how do you say that? How do you say, you know, like learning any language, how do you say fork? How do you say whatever? And so I went out on the street and learned my Sinhala very quickly, much faster than most of the 20-year-olds.
And that's probably the best way to learn a language. And a lot of people don't really grasp that concept.
Yeah, a lot of people kind of forget that the reality is it's by the seat of your pants. You learn by mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
And you learn how to pronounce the language by trying. You're not going to learn it sitting with a bunch of foreigners in a classroom. I'm sorry.
You're right.
I mean, which reminded me when I was in school 50 years ago, you sat with, you know, headphones and a tape and repeating the same thing. Je m'appelle Craig, je m'appelle Craig. You know, I mean, what the heck was I doing? I wasn't communicating and learning the way that you do normally.
Nope, just an audiolingual aspect or a learning tool, yeah.
So the thing that was serendipitous about this was it not only an accident in coming, but so many accidents happened after that. When I landed in Sri Lanka, within the first week, I had never felt more at home ever in my life. And I think it was a combination of going through the problems in the United States with the breakup of my family and going through the trauma of trying to, you know, deal with that situation and not dealing with it very successfully. Sri Lanka sort of became like a hospital for me. It became my hospital room. I stayed here 10 years. The Peace Corps lasted for 2 years. I extended another year that I did for about 6 months, went back to see my kids, and then returned to Sri Lanka with a job from a mining company that was mining sapphires in Montana. They brought me back to Sri Lanka.
Wow.
So I stayed in Sri Lanka for 10 years. During the end of the 90s, I can't remember when 9/11 happened. I can't remember when that exactly happened, whether it's 2000.
2001.
2001. So at the end of the 90s and the beginning of the 2000s, 9/11 happened, and I thought, my gosh, here I am. I'm a perfect candidate to do something in the State Department to help my country, and you know, so I applied. Flying letters at the State Department said, my gosh, you're the perfect kind of person that we want and all this thing. Forgetting, of course, at this time, I'm now 50 years old. Then I flew back to Florida. I went to the United States. I went for the interview. I did past flying colors, the whole thing, went for the personal interview aspect of it and failed miserably.
Why is that?
I was told later, well, the gentleman that was running the program in Florida for that batch happened to be the ex-ambassador in Sri Lanka, and I knew him. So I talked to him afterwards, and he said, Craig, I hate to tell you this, but you know, the whole thing about age discrimination is just a bunch of bullshit. You're 50 years old. They're not going to hire you as a State Department employee because those are 20-year-olds that are going to learn the system and then stay in the system for their lifetime.
That makes sense.
You are coming in, they're not going to bring you in on that status as a 50-year-old. It's just not going to happen. And that made sense to me. It made much more sense than that I didn't do well. You know,
Right.
that I didn't pass the, you know, muster. Right?
Yeah.
Sri Lanka became my home. The sense of humor of the Sri Lankan people is very, very much like my sense of humor. Nothing is sacred. It doesn't matter whether it's Buddhism or the president or whatever it is. Nothing is sacred. You can make fun of anything and people will enjoy and laugh with you. The great, great sense of humor. And a great joie de vivre, I think, of the people is important about Sri Lanka.
Mm-hmm.
But more than that, it is a country that is fairly small, about the size of maybe New Hampshire. But in that space, there's mountains and there's jungle and there's sea, and it's an island, of course. So the variety is huge, all within about an 8-hour distance from Colombo. To the north is about 8 hours because there isn't a major highway there yet. From Colombo, the main city, the capital city, down south to the beach area, the traditional beach areas, is only about 2 hours with the highway now.
Okay.
So getting around Sri Lanka is a lot easier than it was when I came 30 years ago. I mean, it was very, very difficult. Everybody went by bus. The trains were okay. Now with the highways, it's a lot easier to get around and people are a lot more mobile. The downside about that is precisely what you were saying at the beginning, that people don't know a lot about Sri Lanka simply because it was going through a civil war and people weren't coming here because of that 30-year civil war with the Tamil Tigers. The minorities in Sri Lanka were disenfranchised shortly after independence, and Buddhism and Sinhala was made the national language and the national religion. And of course, all the Indian Tamils, the Sri Lankan Tamils, the Muslims, the Malays, all the minority groups in Sri Lanka were also all of a sudden disenfranchised. And it's taken the country, 40 years since independence. 50, how long was it now? 45.
Yeah, when was the independence?
So shortly after India, about the same time, 46, 47, like that.
Okay.
Around the late 40s.
Wow. So you're about
60 years. So the 30-year war was part and parcel of that disenfranchising the minority group, the Tamils. And in that, I think that the country has come together. There's still division in that. Most of the communities are learning all three languages, the major languages being Tamil, the Indian Tamil language, Sinhala, which is the majority, Sinhalese majority, and then English is the link language. Most of the upper class learn and study in the English media. The middle classes and the lower classes study in their native language classes and then take classes in the other languages. I think that Sri Lanka, what is enjoyable about Sri Lanka is that being a culture that's over 2,500 years old and being an island that they think was the original Spice Island that everybody was looking for back when the Portuguese and the Dutch and the British, which all colonized Sri Lanka. All of those major seafaring countries colonized Sri Lanka, except China didn't. China and India invaded a couple of times, but nobody was able to conquer Sri Lanka until the Dutch, the Portuguese, and the British. So they were colonizers for 300 years.
Quite a while, yeah.
So what's happened during that 2,500-year-old history and the recent 300 years of colonization is that Sri Lanka is really a melting pot. There's a small group of people up by Negombo that come from African slaves that came with the Portuguese. I mean, it's just amazing. There's the Malay population that came with the Brits. There's a very diverse population. And of course, the seafaring people being where it is just off the coast of India, in the Indian Ocean, seafaring people from all over the world would stop here for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a real mix of ethnicity.
Well,
people are dark skinned.
Is that culture still kind of alive, that seafaring culture? Are there still groups that live close to the ocean that still go out in boats? And is that still okay?
One of the downsides of that is just now the third wave of corona here in Sri Lanka, they believe was brought by fishermen from India. And the first wave, Sri Lanka was doing great. It had like 217 cases with 13 deaths. And now it's up to 20,000 with 100 deaths. So, I mean, the third wave has hit Sri Lanka also.
And that's because people are coming in and out more frequently now?
Exactly. And you can't stop a fishing boat. And, everybody goes to the fish market and you buy the fish and you take it to the village in the middle of the country that doesn't have fish. And guess what? Everybody has shared the COVID-19.
Yeah, it spreads pretty quickly, especially through trade and commerce.
And I'm sad to see that, but I think the culture is one that works together pretty well, in spite of the minority differences. So it hasn't been as devastating as it has been in, say, Brazil or the United States or India or some of the other countries where being independent is valued. And being independent is valued here in Sri Lanka. It's a trait that people will fight for their independence. Don't tell me what to do.
And I think that's fascinating because you said all these minority groups, are situated all throughout Sri Lanka, but yet they're still working together, and they're working to keep it down. So what's it like, whether it's now with Corona that's happening, or say last year when we didn't have this pandemic going? What's a day like in Sri Lanka for an expat?
Well, it's a little difficult for me because people accept me as a Sri Lankan. I could be a Lansi, and a Lansi is a burgher, someone that came from either Portugal or the Netherlands or England and married into the Sri Lankan culture and family, whether Tamil or Sinhala or Muslim. And then you're just accepted as, even though you have a whiter face, you're just accepted as a member of the Sri Lankan community because I speak the language fluently, and I dress and act like they do.
So you fully embrace it then.
I'm not branded immediately as a foreigner. Sometimes if I go to a village, I'll be speaking Sinhala, and they'll look at me like in total shock that language is coming out of your mouth.
Yeah.
But that happens, I'm sure, to you in Korea. It happened to me in Korea, speaking Korean. People, first thing they would do to turn to the Korean and say, "Is this guy speaking Korean?"
Exactly. And that's what they do, whether it's a restaurant or we're out somewhere, they'll look at the Korean next to you and go, "What? What is he? Is he speaking the language?"
I'm speaking your language. But a typical day, Sri Lankans, it's an equatorial country, so it literally is a 6 to 6 day, 12 months out of the year. It doesn't vary much at all. People wake up with the sun at 6 and tend to be at home and stay home at the village side. Colombo is a huge megalopolis, an Asian multi-cultural mall, cinema, you name it. Everything that anybody could want is available in Colombo. It's a major international Asian city.
Yeah.
So I tend to avoid Colombo. I'm not, I mean, the whole idea is to enjoy yourself in a sort of generic international major city way. So what used to be very, very Sri Lankan 30 years ago is not. Today it's in a big international city, I mean, with the malls and the cineplexes and all of that. So
Yeah.
the the the, the historical aspect of Sri Lanka is trying to be kept, but now with the end of the Civil War, a ton of Chinese development money has come in. Hotels are going up right and left in spite of the Corona stop this year, but the traffic in tourist traffic was huge. It was huge because it was a country that people hadn't seen and hadn't gone to. It is an island paradise. It is a Bali. It is a Thailand. It is a traditional tropical country with all of the trappings that go along with that, including, the fresh fruits and vegetables and coconut and things that are so delicious. The combination of foods here with those colonial powers and mixing with traditional foods, the diet and the food available is absolutely wonderful. It's the Indian curry with a Sri Lankan twist and a Malay twist and a Dutch twist and an English twist, if you will.
Wow. That's
So,
fascinating.
And it's also because English is the upper class language. English is spoken. You're going to find even in the smallest village, the kids are learning English and they're not shy to come up to you and say, my name is, what is your name? Where are you from? So traveling and getting around in Sri Lanka is not difficult at all.
So speaking of that, you mentioned that Colombo's like this mega city now that's kind of developed and China's coming in. And it's fantastic to hear that, even the little children out in the communities are learning languages. What are some places that you would recommend, people go to? I know you really like kind of the countryside and that peacefulness. And people look for that when they travel, right?
Sure. And, ecotourism is here. So you can do the tuk-tuk or bike route, motorcycle. Tuk-tuk is a three-wheeler, the one that comes from Bata in India. I think it's called, what else is it called? A three-wheeler. Yeah, it's a
three-wheeler, tuk-tuk. Yep.
People use those. You can rent cars. You all the things that are available.
I highly recommend that when people travel. Renting a car is the way to go.
Rent a car or rent a tuk-tuk. Or a brand new tuk-tuk is like 9 lakhs, which means 10. Never mind. I forget the trans. The rate.
But they're for rent, right? You can hire or rent one.
A lot of people, what they'll do is they'll come into Sri Lanka, the one major airport, spend one night in the 5-star hotel close to Colombo or in Colombo, and then head down south. Down south is the traditional beach area, Unawatuna, Galle, Matra. The thing is, Colombo is a huge mega center. All the other cities are really relatively small in comparison. So even though you're in Kandy, which is Kandy the number 2 city? Kind of. It's a small provincial capital. It's not like Shanghai, Beijing. It's not that kind of megalopolis at all.
Gotcha.
So when you leave Colombo, you're in smaller cities that are the size of, let's say, I can't even think of one right off the Chico, California. As opposed to San Francisco or Los Angeles or San Diego, it's like Chico.
Okay. No, and I'm sure people haven't heard of that, so it might be quite small.
And those towns you can count on both hands. There's probably 10 of them that are fairly, they have shopping and they're fairly large, but they're not megalopolises. And then everything else are small villages. So the best thing that what the ecotourism does well here, and there's a lot of what do they call that? Uh, those what are they those homes that you have a room in a home. Do you know you can? I can't remember.
Like an Airbnb?
You got it. The Airbnb. The
Okay.
Airbnbs are all over the place now,
Are
and
they?
there's a lot of people that have turned their traditional homes into Airbnbs, into smaller hotels. So all of those apps that are available, I can't think of them, Book Me or whatever they all are.
Yeah.
They're all good. They all are pretty reputable. So the traveling aspect in Sri Lanka is easy now. Communication is relatively easy. I think the one thing that people could be a little shocked by is the touts. There are a number of people that like to hang around tourists. A good 50%, 90%, 50 to 70% are honestly curious to ask about your country. But there's that percentage that are just out to scam and, try to
Sure.
get money and try to take advantage of you. So
Yeah.
that culture isn't as, let's say, as well behaved as in a place like Bali or Thailand. Here
So do
it's a little
those, you call them
unruly.
touts, right?
Yeah.
Are they like, are they mostly in Colombo, or are they spread everywhere
Mostly
across
in
the
Colombo, but they're kind of all over the place.
Are
I
they?
mean, for example, Uber is here, and there's a local one called Pick Me, Flit or whatever that other one isn't here. It's Uber and Pick Me are the two major taxi, what do you call it, para taxi services, and they work very well. But what a lot of them do is they have friends then, along with the tuk-tuk drivers, that run the hotels and the restaurants. So they'll take you to their place as opposed to the place that you want to go to, in that circle of making money from money
Yes.
is
Yeah.
there. I think people are generally surprised at the camaraderie and the just gentle nature of the Sri Lankan people. They are kind and they are open and they are helpful. The environment, unfortunately, suffers with the plastic disease. Ubiquitous plastic bags are everywhere. The younger generation is trying, to amend that. But an interesting observation that I have made in countries like Sri Lanka is that what we forget is that this is a culture that has been around for thousands of years.
Mm-hmm.
And in a natural culture like this, if you think back even 50 years ago, everything was disposable. Everything was biodegradable. So
Right.
if you bought something in the store, it was wrapped in paper with string or a coconut leaf. So what did you do with that? You threw it on the ground.
Yeah.
And after one rainy season, it's gone.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that behavior is still there. It's endemic. So people think without thinking that plastic bag and that plastic fork and that plastic cup is going to let's say worse than all of those, the plastic bottles are everywhere.
Everywhere. And that's all throughout Southeast Asia as well. And I think that mentality is carried. That's a really good point that a lot of people don't think about, is how everything was biodegradable because it was natural. And now you just go, it is. And then you go, oh, it's not, but plastic is everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah. So a foreigner will have a problem here looking for a trash bin, looking for somewhere to put their disposables if they have them. So that is something that needs to be worked on, definitely.
So what do people do now? Do they just take it home with them? Like a foreigner, do you just take your trash home with you?
Yeah, take it home. I think a lot of the eco-tourists are just not using that stuff. They're bringing their own cup and having that filled up and having their own bamboo silverware, and that's definitely the best way to go. Then your footprint is so small.
Right, that's true.
And I think that works. I think the thing that is important to remember about Sri Lanka is because of the 30-year war and it not being a major tourist country, the culture of service is not as profound and excellent as, say, Bali or Bangkok. So
how would it be different then? Can you give me an example?
So probably a good example, and I'm sure that my Sri Lankan friends will either laugh or kill me.
Hopefully,
You're
let's
at a
pray they
restaurant.
laugh.
Yeah. You're at a restaurant
Oh,
and you accidentally drop your utensil on the ground and you ask the waiter, can you please bring me another fork? So the waiter will take off and head toward the kitchen to get you a fork, but someone else will stop him and say, can you please bring me some water? And then as he's still heading toward the kitchen to think about the fork and the water, another person is saying, Mali, moko, mage kama koheda, where's my food? I've been waiting for 30 minutes, where's my food? Come on. So of course, the last person that he sees, he's gonna take care of that person. My fork will never come.
okay.
And it's just because that service education process, the culture of service, is not as long-lived here as it is in a country like France.
Right.
You know, I mean, or Italy, where, my God, they've been serving tourists for 5,000 years. Well, you know, Sri Lanka's been doing it for about 30 years.
Okay.
So the skill level is not nearly as good. So there's some disappointment with that.
But patience
people
is
are
a virtue
genuine.
then.
Yeah. I think that's, boy, you've said it there. Patience is a virtue. I think that's true with all of South Asia, East Asia, West Asia in general.
Absolutely.
Asia in general.
Yes. If you're not a patient person, Southeast Asia is probably not the best place to be.
Well, true. You know, and a lot of people forget this is a tropical island. There
Yeah.
are insects and there are spiders, there are scorpions, there are little things that you normally wouldn't find in a five-star hotel, but they're going to find their way into a five-star hotel.
Yeah, they will.
And you know, if you come, be sure to bring your, you know, bug sprays and your lotions and the things that you need to take care of yourself if you are afraid of those animals.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I have to let you know that I was going to try to get together some photos, but I have so many after 30 years of knowing Sri Lanka.
Oh, I bet.
That if people want to go onto my Facebook page, and that's all one word, Craig, C-R-A-I-G, Robert, R-O-B-E-R-T, Gardner, G-A-R-D-N-E-R, Craig Robert Gardner, one word, that's my Facebook. You'll see this mug and you'll see thousands of photos and anybody can look at them.
Okay, wonderful.
A lot of village photos, city photos, what have you. My cats are complaining. I think it's time to eat. Oh no. Anyway. I'm sure that I've left out stuff. Jeff, help me here. What
Well,
am I
you know,
not sharing?
this has been jam-packed with information, and I think people kind of looking at Sri Lanka, as we were talking about before, you know, people see it as this exotic mystery. You know, it's this island, like possibly like a Robin Crusoe type deal. You know what I mean? Like, let's go there. As you said, it's a tropical place. There's beaches. But what people have to be prepared for is, in a lot of these Southeast Asian, the major cities are crowded.
Right.
It's going to take time to get to a beach or to get to these isolated areas. As you mentioned, it takes about 2 hours to head south, right?
True.
And
True.
much longer to get up north. You know,
right.
I assume there's probably mountains in the way. Is that why it takes so long?
The middle of the country, it literally is shaped like a pearl or a mango. And in the center of the country is Kandy, and that's the hill country. That literally is the mountain.
With the city on
is
top.
the center. Right. So then from that center, everything flows down. And so the streams, the rivers, everybody bathes in the rivers. I mean, because they're clean. The flow is all to the ocean from that center high point in the middle of the country, except in the north, which heads up into the dry zone, and Jaffna is very, very hot. That is just a kilometer, 5 kilometers away from India. So that is the hot tip of the island up by India. The southern coast and the eastern coast is much less developed, and the beaches are white sand as opposed to the golden sand of the west coast. West coast is the traditional area that tourists have been coming to since the Brits started coming. Italians, Germans, it's a very popular place for a lot of Europeans. But as I said, they'll fly into the international airport outside of Colombo. They'll taxi into Colombo, spend one night in Colombo. The next day they leave Colombo. It takes 2 hours to get out of Colombo. Wow. Then you're on the highway for 2 hours, you're down south. But that megalopolis is a hellhole. I mean, the traffic is always there, right?
Oh my
so
goodness.
Then you're down south, and all of a sudden these 10 cities that are not very big at all are the population centers and villages, and it's just village. And so the beaches are nice and clean and fairly clean.
So I'm kind of curious. You mentioned that the East Coast. I like the white sands. I like both,
Right.
but white sand for some reason stands out to me. There's some beautiful islands in Thailand with some beautiful white beaches.
Right.
Is there any place specifically that's kind of, you don't have to tell secrets to anybody, but are there any places you go, hey, if you guys come, definitely check this place out?
Arangam Bay. You go over to the east side, Arangam Bay. You go to the east side, you go to Trimcommolly and Batikalo, Batty and Trimco. And Batty and Trimco are literally on the opposite side of the island of Colombo. And then you go down the east coast, that's Arangam Bay. It's pristine, it's lovely. There are wild elephants. There are the national parks are wonderful. You will see leopards. You will see elephants. You will see alligators. Is it alligator or crocodile? I always get it mixed up. It's an alligator.
Me too. Don't ask me.
I mean, the wildlife is here. On my property, I'll have cobras come by. I'll have peacocks and peahens come by, eagles. I mean, nature is full. It's a tropical island that is a verdant island. Wow. One of the best experiences I ever had in my life was going to a meeting in Colombo as a Peace Corps volunteer and getting a rose. I can't remember what the occasion is, but they gave me a clipped rose that I took home back to the village. And the rose, when it, kind of wilted and all the leaves fell off, I just stuck that cut stem rose in the ground. Within 2 weeks, I had a rose bush growing in my village from that cut rose. The ground, it is a
very
super
fertile.
Blessed island. One of the things that I think every Sri Lankan will say, and anybody that loves Sri Lanka will say, that this is a blessed island. They'll probably excuse the people from that. We're talking about the island itself. We're talking about nature. We're talking about God's gift. It's extraordinary. It's an extraordinary island.
Wow.
And I'm blessed to be here and to be on an acre of it, and I enjoy myself. And I'm a village person. I'm a country boy. I enjoy the country. I don't really need to go into Colombo. And nowadays, of course, like everywhere on the planet with the COVID, everybody does everything online anyway. Delivery services are fairly good, so you can get whatever you need from the big city to come to you. And it might be a little costly sometimes, but it's doable.
Okay. What kind of jobs? I'm kind of transitioning here, but it just popped in my head, and I'm kind of curious. What kind of jobs are offered for foreigners, or is it kind of restricted to just the local
It's
people
pretty
stay.
well restricted. I mean, the visa is difficult to get
Okay.
the visa. There's a Board of Investment visa. Those companies can hire foreigners with a, under the BOI contract. And the Board of Investment, that can be anything from teaching there are a lot of schools here. There are the national universities are free. So the competition to get into the national universities, I think there's like 10 campuses, is fierce, and only a small percentage of the people can go there. So what has happened in the last 20 years are private universities and private colleges that offer degrees with partnerships with universities and colleges in Great Britain, in Malaysia, in the
Okay.
United States, Australia, you name it. Those are now kind of like ubiquitous. So getting a teaching position with them or the international schools is definitely something that can be done.
So
If you
education
are-
seems to be the route for many foreigners
Absolutely.
for a job.
I mean,
Okay.
this is not a country where the village person is an ignorant person. The country prides itself on a very high standard of education. The educated people of the major cities, there are tons of PhDs. A lot of people will go abroad to get their doctorate or their master's, their bachelor's, come back to Sri Lanka. It is not a dumbed down country at all. Some of the third world aspects of government certainly apply. A new government will tend to scrap everything that the former government has done and start afresh. So the
Okay.
continuum of state projects perhaps isn't as clear.
Mm.
My Korean Jung just reminded me that I should take a mental pause and not talk so much.
Isn't it wonderful having
haven't.
so many different languages that you can just pull words out and go,
Yeah,
you know,
just
my Jung is telling me. Brilliant.
But I think what one person has told me about Sri Lanka that I think perhaps is still true, that Sri Lanka is a country that people will come to one time and not return. That makes me kind of sad. The return people are people that literally would just go down to the house they have or the friend they have down south and spend 3 weeks on the beach and always come because it's relatively cheap.
Okay.
But the return aspect is not great, and the 5-star aspect is not great. So the income producing aspect of tourism isn't reaching its full potential. Like I said, the Chinese are building, not just the Chinese, but there are tons of new huge hotels in Colombo. I think they're hoping to have the island become like a convention spot for international conventions to come. I think that perhaps that will happen slowly over the years. I know there's a huge concern with the government for ecotourism and keeping the pristine verdant aspect of the island alive, as opposed to
it should be of
that.
importance to any government.
Yeah, and we'll see. The changes I've seen in 30 years, and I haven't been back to a lot of the countries that I visited in my youth as an army brat. I haven't been back to Korea. I lived in Korea where I met you for 15 years. And I'm sure the changes are just exactly the same there. Everybody leaves the country and moves to the city.
Yeah.
And then the country becomes kind of like empty and beautiful.
Yeah. Well, one of the things I noticed when people do that and they move to the city, and one aspect that I really love about Korea is the countryside food, the fresh vegetables, the fresh foods that you get. And it's kind of sad to see, as you mentioned, everybody's moving to the city. Well, some of the shops or the restaurants, they're closing down and they're not as abundant as they used to be. But that's one thing that I really love is the Korean food. When people ask me, it's like, what's something that you really enjoy about it? It's the freshness of the food. That's really
Oh.
what
Oh, absolutely. Gimbap, bokkeumbap, any of those bops.
yeah.
The fresh vegetables, just absolutely wonderful. Do you know the rice culture in Korea came from Sri Lanka via China. It was a dry culture as opposed to a water rice culture. And so a lot of the words in Korean mirror the words in Pali and Sinhala. For bop, rice is bat here.
Bat and bop.
V there is sal in Korean is hal here.
Wow.
It's really amazing to see that connection between the countries. It's really wow. That reminds me something about the food that I should mention is that those smaller village kades, shops, food shops, a lot of foreigners will avoid them, thinking, look at all the flies and how unclean it is. The people are clean. Their dietary behavior is clean. They're not going to give you, I mean, there might be an ant in your tea. There might be a fly on the table, but the food is good and clean. Very few people get disease like they do. An example would be probably Nepal. 90% of people who go to Nepal end up with stomach problems.
Yep.
You know, this is not a country where that happens. Worming and that kind of medicine is not absolutely necessary, though anybody internationally traveling should take a Vermox once every 6 months anyway.
Just
it's
precaution. Yep. Because eating
precaution.
different foods, your stomach, everything reacts very differently.
True, but definitely, you know, the old adage, I had a family member tell me when I was a young boy in Wyoming, he told me, he said, wherever you go in the country, you eat where everybody else is.
Yes.
Don't go to the shop where there's just one bike. Go to the shop where all the trucks are. Go to the shop where all the vans are. Go to the shop where the buses are stopping.
Yeah.
Go where the people are. Yes, there may be flies. Yes, there may be insects, but the food will be delicious and it's very, very cheap.
Yeah.
And
how so? What are we looking at cheap wise?
You know, unfortunately, my dollar to rupee, I don't know what it's worth. I think 100 rupees is 50 cents. I think 100 rupees is 58 cents, something like that.
Let's
Do you have
see.
a
Rupee
Sri
to
Lanka
dollar? I'm going to check really quick.
SLR to USD?
All right, SLR to USD. Let's check it.
Yeah, put 1 USD. How many SLR?
Oh my goodness. Let me convert something bigger. I can't do one to one.
Okay.
It's less than a penny.
I think it's like 58 cents. I think 100 rupees is like 58 cents.
Yes, you're right.
Okay. So what will happen here in the country is I'll wake up. I have a young man that comes from the village and he lives with me and helps take care of the land and take care of me. In my God, 2 weeks, I turned 70 years old, Jeff. Oh my God. Anyway,
still young in spirit.
Some days we decide we're not going to cook and it's not worth it. So we'll just go to the little local kade and get breakfast or get lunch or get dinner.
Yeah.
Here in the village, for 2 people, we'll pay about 150. We'll pay about 75 cents to $1 for breakfast or lunch or dinner.
And what does something like that include? Like what would breakfast be?
So that would be like for breakfast, they have a thing called string hoppers, which basically is rice flour that's kind of squirted out into like noodle shapes and then steamed. And that noodle base, then you put dal curry on top of, maybe some pol sambol, coconut sambol, and you'll eat that just with your fingers for breakfast, or a coconut roti, which is a flatbread made with wheat flour and coconut and chili. sambol, something like that. Coffee, tea is ubiquitous. Dinner, rice and curries. Meat
For
and
less than
fish and
$1.
chicken and that stuff is available. Yeah, less than $1. Now, when you go to Colombo, that price is going to quadruple and be, or more, be $500, $600, 300 to 600, as opposed to 100.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
Colombo prices, of course, are city prices, and you're paying for the city. Well,
Yeah. And that's anywhere.
Everybody
Yeah.
knows it. That's anywhere.
Wow.
You can find cheap places in Colombo. You just have to ask the local people where they eat. Don't go where the tuk-tuk takes
Yeah.
you.
Not if you want to save money. No. And don't let the tuk-tuk drivers take you anywhere.
You know, there are very famous restaurants that are well known that are in, I can't remember the name of that international guide that everybody uses nowadays.
Lonely Planet.
Yeah, Lonely
The book?
Planet. Boy, it didn't exist for the first 20 years of my traveling, so I forget its name. It's pretty good. There are definitely tourist spots in Colombo and around where the service is good and the food is excellent, like in any major city. But most tourists to Sri Lanka, most visitors to Sri Lanka, try to get out into the country, try to get away from the city, try to get into the village areas on the beach. Like I said, the East Coast beaches are more pristine and less people have been there, not as well traveled. It will take you about, from Colombo, another 8 hours to get over there. The same like going up to Jaffna, takes 8 hours to get up to Jaffna. Of course, now with the Southern Highway, going down to Gaul and Matra, going to Hikadua, Unawatuna, the famous beaches that people can find in any of the tourist guides, those are all about 2 to 4 hours away, depending on how long it takes you to get out of Colombo.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So that's good. I mean, if you're looking for a beautiful place, kind of secluded out in the country, a new experience that many people may not get, then 8 hours really isn't too bad, especially if you're going to be there for 2 weeks or more.
And the highway, the newer roads are comfortable, and that's all right. That the tuk-tuk, the three-wheeler, is a bouncy ride. That's I mean, it doesn't have shocks, and the roads are not the best in the planet, in the city. Not unlike some of the major cities in the United States. So, I would say that one of the things that's kind of interesting about that long culture and tradition in Sri Lanka is that when you meet a family, and they will want to bring you into their family as a family member. I'm Sudusiya, which means white grandfather or foreign grandfather to a number of families, and is that you'll notice they're not shy about calling people and using color to describe their daughter or their mother or their uncle. So they'll say Kalu, which means black, and Sudu, which means white. So they'll say Sudupute, white son, white, or they'll say Kaludua, black daughter, meaning the gradation of their colors. And the reason that is, and it's quite interesting, is that in a single family, because of this long period of travelings and mixing of genetics, of one family will have a full range of color. You literally will have a boy who is as white as I am, and a mother that is as black as an African from the middle of Zimbabwe. Is it Zimbabwe now? Maybe the name isn't changed. Anyway, but the color variation within a family is extraordinary. So they use color to describe each other, and it's not done in a racist way that you will perhaps find in other cultures
in the West.
And it's something that you may be a bit shocking. My batch, I have to mention my batch in the Peace Corps. There was a Black American in my batch, my friend Carrie. And Carrie, the word for foreigner is also the word for white, which is Sudu, right?
Okay.
So a foreigner is a Sudo, is a foreigner, Sudo. So they didn't know what to call Carrie because Sudo also means white. So they didn't know. what to call him. It was really funny to deal with that. Oh, quite interesting.
That's a real interesting fact that, you know, a lot of people from the West, they see racism and they hear somebody, hey, black man, hey, brown man, hey, white man, and
Yeah.
immediately go to that. But it's really important that we know that
Yeah.
not all cultures are like that. Cultures are different.
Yeah, exactly. It's not, and I think, I mean, one of the things that I'm very fortunate, and I have to mention that American Thanksgiving is coming up in a day or two.
Yeah, real
I'm
soon.
extremely thankful for my heritage. My family came from Scotland. Majority came from Scotland to America, came from Denmark to America, England, Slovakia, all mixed in America. And here I am retired in Sri Lanka and keeping up the tradition. And I think it's very valuable to remember that we are a transient animal, and that there's absolutely nothing wrong with leaving your birthplace and living somewhere else and becoming a member of another community and another culture. It's easy to do. It's definitely rewarding. I feel so relaxed here. I'm very safe. I'm very healthy. Everything is going well for me. If I could afford the United States, maybe I'd be there, but I probably not. I'm perfectly content here in Sri Lanka. Like I said, I went to Korea to earn some money for 15 years and returned to Sri Lanka. So
Fantastic.
here I am.
Fantastic. Well, I really wish we could continue this for another 3-4 hours. You know, this has been fantastic.
I've enjoyed meeting you again, seeing you again. All my love to Alice and the twins.
Thank you.
And thank you very much for the opportunity to share a little bit about Sri Lanka with you.
Yeah. Well, before I sign off here, is there any last words you'd like to share with our listeners?
Yes. Sri Lanka is probably still the only country in the world that has more holidays than any other country. I think officially there may be 40. Every full moon day is a holiday. So of course that means every month there's a full moon day. Some months have 2 full moon days. Yeah. Because every full moon day there was something special happened to Lord Buddha, and the majority of the people are Buddhist. The Muslim holidays are also celebrated, as well as the Christian holidays. So you get Christmas and you get Il Fitr. You get the Tamil holidays also because India is a neighbor. So not all of them are national holidays, but a lot of the ethnic groups will take that holiday off. The big ones like Christmas is the national holiday. So don't be surprised that if you land, it's near a holiday, everything shuts down, as well as the shops that sell alcohol. Government controls alcohol. It is a liquid that is not approved by most strict religions. So one of the first things they do on every holiday is shut down the wine stores and the availability for people to get it. Foreigners usually can get it at a 5-star hotel. You can bribe somebody on the street. There are other ways of getting it, but the normal way is locked and shut down. And sometimes for the major holidays for 3 or 4 days. So those of you that enjoy imbibing, definitely be prepared and check your calendar what the holiday is coming up.
Well, that is a great tip to leave on, and something that a lot of people will want to know.
You go on vacation to enjoy, and most of the people that I know enjoy to have a drink or two.
Exactly, a nice cocktail on the beach.
That's true. That's true.
All right. Well, Craig, thank you again for your time, and this has been fantastic. Hopefully we can have you on again.
Well, I'd love to do that. We can talk about something else or talk more about Sri Lanka, in more detail or something like that. I'd love to join with you. And now I'm motivated to go to your website and check out some of the other interviews you've done. This has been super.
That's right.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Well, Yerba Travel.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks. Yerba Travel listeners, thank you for tuning in. And we'll talk to you in the next podcast. This is Jeff Hatter signing off.